Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I would like to greet Professor Violeta Beširević, moderator Mark Donfried, all speakers of this interesting panel, and of course, students of Union Law faculty and students of Academy for Cultural Diplomacy from Berlin. Well, the destiny of the last speaker is sometimes that we have to repeat some things which previous speakers said, but we have an opportunity to contribute with some new facts which were not mentioned. So COVID-19 or coronavirus, which is ruling our lives for 2 years already, has brought us uncertainty and new challenges. Almost all aspects of our lives have been reshaped, or better to say, deteriorated, no matter in which continent we live, how rich or poor we are, or what level of healthcare we have. Pandemic, as I said, has reshaped culture diplomacy, because culture diplomacy, in my opinion, is a living process that adapts to existing circumstances. Thus, culture diplomacy nowadays is almost completely focused on all aspects around COVID. But the main are, in my opinion, handling of pandemic and vaccine war. USA promoting their vaccine manufacturers, Russians theirs, Chinese also. Of course, promotion is led by manufacturers themselves, but equally they are supported by their governments' propaganda machineries. So vaccines have become absolutely political and commercial issue, which consequently led to the confusion of the people worldwide and to emerge of false news and conspiracy theories. So culture diplomacy in its agenda nowadays has an additional task, which is fighting conspiracy theories, because it has become very important how governments and healthcare control and cope the virus at their countries, but at the same time, it's maybe even more important for the image of the country is how their efforts are judged abroad, since these have impacted image of their countries in a negative or positive way. For example, Serbia had an excellent publicity in the international press because of the very successful vaccination dynamic, especially in the first 6 months, when, if I remember, we were at the second or the third place, only behind Israel or Holland. Also, Serbia was among the first countries which started vaccination of homeless persons. So at that time, we witnessed an example of the very effective medical or health diplomacy instead of typical culture diplomacy. But where Serbia failed, it was the inability to convince its own population to get vaccinated, because Serbia was not capable to fight with vaccine hesitancy, which fortunately passed unnoticed in the foreign press, so the positive publicity prevailed over the vaccine hesitancy. I'll give you an example. It happened that in March and April this year, I was in Spain. I have to say fully vaccinated. And where my Spanish friends were desperate, waiting their turn to get vaccine. And at the same time reading in the Spanish press how simple it was in Serbia to get a vaccine. But they couldn't understand that in Serbia there were a lot of people who refused to get vaccine, including medical doctors and hospital staff. Well, later Spain, by the end of the summer, succeeded in vaccinating around 70% of their population. Culture diplomacy in the time of COVID has been changed in different ways, because the focus, as I said, was on improving the image of the countries, which were facing internal crisis due to bad control of the pandemics, as we see what is happening in Great Britain, where families of the COVID victims are massively accusing government, and especially Boris Johnson, of mishandling the pandemic. Brazil, for instance, where President Bolsonaro is treated almost as an assassin because of the low-profile activities in fighting COVID. On the other side, some countries are using the situation to present themselves as champions and world leaders in preventing COVID through the medical or health culture diplomacy by sending aid abroad. Units, you remember all, units of Russian army spraying with chemicals and disinfecting hospitals, government buildings in the cities in the northern Italy, a NATO country. Also, my country, Serbia, donating tens of thousands or even more of Chinese Sinopharm and AstraZeneca vaccines to some neighboring countries and some African countries, even to the Czech Republic, EU country. Then Serbia publicly vaccinating foreign ambassadors and their diplomatic staff in Belgrade, which was met again with a very positive publicity. However, COVID had a huge negative impact on diplomatic activities in general and consequently on typical tools of cultural diplomacy, especially on those based on attendance or face-to-face interaction projects which countries through their embassies or culture centers pursue abroad. The most negative impact was due to COVID restrictions on the mobility of people in almost all countries in the world, then restrictions on flights or complete closing some flight destinations. The visa section of some embassies have been temporarily or completely closed. For example, US have announced a couple of weeks ago that it will lift COVID travel restrictions for fully vaccinated foreign nationals on November 8th, thus ending historic restrictions that had barred much of the world from entering the US, especially from China, Canada, Mexico, India, Brazil, much of Europe and elsewhere. Just to remind that restrictions on non-US citizens were first imposed on air travelers from China back in January 2020, and then extended to dozens of other countries without any clear metrics for how and when to lift them. In US, curbs on non-essential travelers, if I remember, have been in place since March 2020. I want to emphasize that expression non-essential travelers, which was widely used during these 18 months, justifying travel restrictions. What does it mean, essential travelers? Who they are? In my opinion, it refers mostly to tourism, culture, and education. Actually, to all those essential tools of cultural diplomacy. The curb on so-called non-essential travelers, I have in mind, there is not in the US, but restrictions worldwide, then lockdowns, PCR tests, vaccine certificates, temperature control of passengers, all that shrunk tourism, blocked culture, blocked culture exchange, deprived visits of scholars, exchange of students. For instance, Erasmus is endangered. Expositions, theatrical plays, participation in the trade fairs, book fairs, tourist fairs. University professors are not traveling. Scientific researchers, study trips, intellectuals, and of course, art and culture performers, musicians, dancers, theater actors, singers, actually those who are carriers and promoters of culture diplomacy, where or they are still banned to travel. So the promotion of the culture and education abroad are affected and maybe are the biggest victims of the pandemic. One example, I always joke with that. Even the famous and unstoppable British secret agent 007, James Bond, was stopped by pandemic. I have in mind the latest movie, No Time to Die, which world premiere was supposed to be more than a half a year ago or even more, but it was postponed for this October waiting for better times and reopening of cinema halls. So there are plenty of such examples where culture and popular culture are trying to find a way to the audience. So it is more than evident that culture diplomacy tools and channels of communication have been affected very much. Even the communication or direct contacts between diplomats due to limitations of social distancing have been reduced. Also contacts with their counterparts in the countries to which they are accredited, which complicates performing of their everyday diplomatic duties. So who are the survivors in this situation, if there are any? Obviously, only those countries with high digital level of preparedness. For instance, embassies and culture centers which succeeded to continue their communication with the foreign public on the e-platforms like Twitter, Facebook, etc. Due to the pandemic, as I said, everything went online and digital. So at this stage of COVID crisis, the use of digitalization shows how modern and efficient cultural diplomacy actors are. At the same time, those who exclusively or extensively use classical activities like face-to-face projects or based on human touch through direct person-to-person contact, they were hit more than others during the pandemic. I have in mind countries known by their tourism, art, monuments, and history, like Spain, Italy, France, England, Germany, Russia. Sorry if I put Spain in the first place, but since I spent some 12 years there and I was ambassador there, I'm influenced by the Spanish culture diplomacy. So we have witnessed that the most prestigious museums and art galleries in the world opened their doors last year through so-called virtual tours, etc. Maybe the solution in the present situation is to combine more than before the digital, online, and the physical presence where, of course, circumstances permit so. But not to be so pessimistic at this moment. There is a place in the world where culture diplomacy is functioning very well. And this is Expo in Dubai, where Serbia is participating in the full capacity, and which is a great chance for the promotion of Serbian culture, scientific achievements, creative industries in these crazy times of COVID. And I hope that the Expo will not close its doors due to some sudden corona attack, and will continue to be open till the end of March 2022. Well, as I said, panic, fear, uncertainty, and many deaths have caused new challenges for the cultural diplomacy to fight. And this is an unprecedented quantity of fake news, conspiracy theories, half-truths, and disinformation, which were spread by Viber, WhatsApp, emails, through social media, and misguided the public globally. Personally, I see the threat of conspiracy theories as the most dangerous and harmful thing for the health of the people, because the major consequence is the vaccine hesitancy, which is very much evident in Serbia. Of course, in other countries too. We are living the times when people in some countries lose their jobs because of refusing to become vaccinated. Just to mention the widely spread disinformation like Chinese lab-created virus, China, the country responsible for leakage and spreading coronavirus, higher mortality among those vaccinated than among non-vaccinated. Vaccination leads to infertility. Okay, that message was directed to the younger population. Even 5G network spreading the virus, which was directed, that message was directed towards China again. Vaccine containing microchips in order to control humanity. Bill Gates and those who are ruling the world want to reduce the world population. Ivermectin as a salvation medicine. Who knows, maybe it is. Of course, such accusations are seriously damaging international image of some countries over the long term. In this case of China, because as I see the file with leakage of virus still is not closed. Well, as a result, counter policies towards conspiracy theories appear to be one of the major tasks for cultural diplomacy during the pandemic as never before. So nowadays we are witnessing the medical or health diplomacy, healthcare diplomacy, which is gaining the ground more and more. And I see it as a modified part of the culture diplomacy, or as a kind of so-called soft power or sophisticated propaganda, although I don't like the word propaganda. A few words about tourism. Tourism is, as an essential tool of culture diplomacy, is very much affected. According to the UN WTO, this is the World Tourist Organizations with headquarters in Madrid. According to them, 62 million jobs in tourism all over the world were lost. For example, only in Serbia, the loss in tourism was around €1 billion, and Serbia is not an important destination. Although I have to say that last couple of years, revenues in tourism jumped significantly in Serbia. And in Serbia, more than 1,000 jobs were lost in tourism. So if that happened in Serbia, you can imagine the loss in Spain, Italy, France, which are the most popular destinations in Europe for sure, where the revenues are calculated in hundreds of billions of euros. So the same is happening in culture, because everything is interconnected, of course. I have in mind the crisis caused by the closure of artistic and cultural centers, museums, cinema halls, galleries, theaters, and other infrastructures. All this created and still is creating enormous financial problems to the culture. Well, that sharp decline in the revenues in the culture sphere and artistic production is more than evident, and it is disastrous for the survival, even physical survival of art performers and for the culture as a whole. Thank you. I have more, but I think we are running out of the time, so thank you very much.